Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and welcome to another countdown. When I decided to do the Game of Thrones list in a very different way than I expected, I promised this would be my next big video. Also, I said Game of Thrones wouldn't be considered one of my main 3 shows I talk about on this channel, like I initially promised, because of the way I'm doing those videos. Instead, I would reveal the other show I'm gonna look at around this time soon enough. So at the end of the video, I will announce what the third show at the moment will be. With all that said, let's get into what this video is actually about. Simpsons Season 3 and the best episodes of it. Season 3 is a much more polished version of Season 2. It really helped the show's staying power. While I don't think the stories this time around are usually as good as Season 2, Season 3 is technically better than that season because of how much of a step up it is in every other way, especially comedy. This is a funnier season than Season 2 with better pacing, animation, and a lot more polish. If Season 2 tries to develop its characters more and tell a great story, then Season 3 puts all its effort into making you laugh, while still having a good story, but that's still a much smaller part of the experience, which will become very apparent soon. There are definitely episodes that escape from this norm, but Season 3 is usually focused primarily on how much comedy we can get out of a story, which is fine, but the more character-driven, introspective aspects that I loved so much from the last season that made for such great episodes as Lisa's Substitute and Bart Gets an F do get lost in the shuffle. So even though I can admit this is a great season with many stellar episodes, and one of the most important, it's never been one of my personal favorites because of that reason. Especially comparing it to Season 4, which backtracks a little bit and tries to balance its elements a bit better to amazing success. But we'll get there when we get there. Once again though, Season 3 does have its share of amazing episodes despite this, and is still a damn great season. And the best episodes do come in many shapes and sizes because of this. Also, once again, this is a very funny season, and when it's really funny, it's some of the funniest Simpsons material of all time. So it should be very interesting to see which episodes come out on top. But before we begin, I should explain why I'm not doing a worst list. Well, it's because there aren't a lot of bad episodes in classic Simpsons, which doesn't give me a lot to talk about on a season-by-season basis. So while I will continue to do worst lists, they'll come in a different form that I'll reveal sometime later in the future. With that said, let's get into the list. Here is my top 5 best Simpsons Season 3 episodes. Number 5. Flaming Moe's. Like my Season 2 list, I had my 4 through 1 spots picked pretty much right away, and debated a long time about which episode I was gonna put at number 5. I had a lot of choices, which once again you'll be able to see when we get to my honorable mentions. I could have put any one of them here for a number of very different reasons, but I ended up going with Flaming Moe's for one big reason. The dynamic between Homer and Moe is so much fun, and it drives the entire episode. It's so interesting to see their rivalry and how much Moe's action of stealing the drink from Homer really affects both of them. From Homer going mad and his vendetta against Moe growing stronger and stronger by the day, and Moe's guilt under all the success he's having. The way these two play off of each other and the conversations they have are great through this very interesting story. It leads to so many great jokes and moments. The rivalry is just a lot of fun, with the Flaming Moe setting, the bar to be more specific, where so much happens, and it all gets better throughout the entire episode, as more variables get added, which leads to a slap in the face of an ending in the best possible way. We get to see so much about these characters, which leads to so many great moments because of this fun plot and setting, along with everything else that makes Flaming Moe's such a fun ride and one of the best episodes of this season. While there was a lot of competition for this spot, Flaming Moe's just goes so far with its concept that I couldn't deny putting it here. Well, in all honesty, I don't have a ton to say about it, and it is a bit slow and underdeveloped for my liking in places. It's still just so much fun that I couldn't deny putting it on this list, even if it's not very high. Number 4. Bart the Lover. This is what I meant when Season 3 can occasionally pull out a much more story-driven episode that gives a deep dive look into one of its characters. Mrs. Krabappel is a great character who doesn't get enough love or time in the show. And this episode really shows why this is by exploring her life and how aspects of it affect her. It's so interesting to see how her job and her messed up love life really get to her based off the way she interacts with others and the choices she makes. We get such a down-to-earth look at this minor character, and it makes her feel so real. This is also due to the fact of the amazing understated performance of Marcia Wallace, who is always great in the show, but this is one of her absolute best performances. She just gives such a down-to-earth performance here, and once again, it just makes the character feel so real. It's so good in this episode. What's even more interesting about it, though, is how much of a contrast Edna's life is to everything else in the episode. How all the weird and wacky stuff going on is happening when Edna just can't catch a break in her life. It's used to make the funny aspects of this episode even funnier. I don't even need to tell you that I don't want any damn vegetables and the swear jar is some of the funniest stuff in The Simpsons, along with the yo-yo stuff and the actual prank itself being a lot of fun to watch. The way Bart has to keep doing different and weird things to fully fool Mrs. Krabappel is so hilarious, but it leads to showing just how sad and messed up this all is. The episode balances its story and comedy perfectly because of the episode structure. The comedy plays off of the main story so well, but it makes it even sadder when Bart comes to the realization that Mrs. Krabappel is really suffering because we've been focusing on all this comedy the whole time. It's such a heartbreaking moment, and it leads to such a sweet ending. This is just one of the funniest episodes of the season that fleshes out a character so well in a great way and makes them feel so goddamn real. So when we see her find a little happiness at the end, we just feel so good for her after everything she has gone through, while structuring the episode really well to bring the best aspects out of everything, story and comedy. This episode really shows what a step up Season 3 is, and what the show was really capable of at its best around the time, because of how much of a complete package this episode is. But the reason this isn't any higher is because I think the actual pacing is a little weird. While I like how the episode is structured, I think the comedy side does take up a bit too much time, and I would have liked to see a bit more of Mrs. Krabappel's life because of just how interesting it is. Also, I think the scene where the family is writing the final letter is kind of weird. It's a good scene that does wrap up things well, but after everything that has happened, it's just strange that the episode is like, hey, let's drop everything and have this wholesome scene of the family bonding while writing this important letter to not humiliate this lady. Once again, I like the scene, and it's not bad by any means, but I think if Bart would have written the letter on his own, it would have been more personal and thematically have fit more, along with the final scene of them walking out together being a bit more impactful because of this. So even though I love this episode and what it tries to do, if you want to see a much better episode that does similar things, then look no further than my number 3. Like Father, Like Clown. This episode is similar to Bart the Lover in a sense, because it really develops one of our side characters. But I like this one more because it's better paced and goes much further with its story. I love how the first half of this episode perfectly sets up who Krusty is. His relationship with the people around him, the persona he puts on versus who he really is, and the way people, especially kids, look up to him, even though he disappoints so many. There is so much mystery and unexplained things about Krusty, which makes all this stuff we learn more interesting. And it all leads to the dinner scene, where we learn about Krusty's relationship with his father, and all the mysteries around Krusty suddenly disappear when you realize how sad the mention of it makes him, and how broken he is because of it. So we go from a very slow character development centric first half to a much more fast paced, philosophical second half of Bart and Lisa trying to convince Krusty's father to accept him. It's so interesting seeing the back and forth between these characters, and it leads to a really interesting dialogue about the subject matter along with many great jokes. You really do grow to care about Krusty throughout the episode and want to see him reunite with his father, so you're invested to see Bart and Lisa succeed. But in the end, his father does come around, and we get a sweet ending of them meeting up again. I really love this episode for how far it goes with showing this relationship. It spends the first half really defining who Krusty is and how his father disowning him because he wanted to become an entertainer really affects him, and spends the second half showing every reason why his father feels this way, while being funny all the way through and still having such a rawness to it. This comes back to how well the episode is paced and structured. It also comes back to just how detailed the episode is, and how far they go with showing off why Krusty and his father act the way they do and have made the choices they have based on their passions and their beliefs. And both parts of the episode are just so different from each other, but are so detailed and introspective because of these reasons, and add to such an interesting whole of a story, which makes the episode one of the most creative of the season for how well written and complex it is, but how different it is as well. Well, I think the ending is a little underdeveloped because I personally think it should have taken more for Krusty's father to come around than one pretty good quote, but that's my only issue, and it doesn't take away from the fact that this is one of the most interesting, complex, and well-paced episodes of the show. But there are still 2 from the season, which are even better. Number 2. Radio Bart. Well, like Father, Like Clown has the best story of the season, Season 3 is at its best when it's funny. And there were 2 episodes this season that were funnier than all the rest, and choosing between them was ridiculously hard. I debated for such a long time, and almost just flipped a coin. But in the end, Radio Bart ended up at number 2. This episode is just paced so well. We really get a good setup to why Bart is in this situation and how the situation keeps changing and evolving, leading to some excellent commentary on the media and the entertainment industry in general. But honestly, while all that is fine and good, this episode is here completely because of its jokes, and how much comedic material this episode gets out of all its ideas, from the birthday stuff to the Bart pranks that he pulls throughout the episode, and all the ways he fools the town, along with the way everyone reacts to the situation, because the episode is just paced so well, and it allows the writers to get the most jokes out of every scene. This is just one of the best paced episodes of the series. The episode just keeps building and building and getting funnier as it goes on, and has such an interesting commentary to elevate the episode even more and make it even funnier. That's all I really can say. It's just a great plot that they get a comedy goldmine out of, along with having some great social commentary on interesting topics, so you get something a little deeper out of the episode. Because this entry is pretty short, because the episode really just speaks for itself, to prove my point about this episode being extremely funny and well done, I'll list off a few of my favorite jokes. The well digging scene is great because of the weirdness of it all. The sending our love down the well song is so funny because of how well done of a parody it is from its original source material, and how well it plays into the social commentary aspect of the episode, while once again just being so freaking funny and stupid at the same time. But honestly, my favorite joke is in the commercial for the radio where the boy is singing Convoy, which is such a weird song choice, but then Homer sings it later into the microphone. Why, out of all the songs, did this company choose this one? Convoy is a terrible song, and in the actual version of it, the guy isn't really even singing. He is talking more than anything, so it's so funny to see this kid and Homer try to sing this terrible oddball song to sell this product. It cracks me up every time because of how unfitting it is, but how absolutely hilarious it is because of that. There are many other great jokes, but you get my point. There were a bunch of others I could have mentioned because this is one of the funniest episodes of the show, along with being just so well-rounded, and well, it was very close to being number one, and I almost did put it there because of how well this thing is paced and how funny it is while having very interesting commentary on some interesting subjects to push it over the edge and elevate it. There was still one episode that was even funnier and went a bit further with its concept, as hard as that is to believe, even if I don't want to admit it. But before we get into that, here are my 9 honorable mentions that just missed the list. While Season 3 might not be my personal favorite, it's still a great season because of how many amazing highs it has, and it's just one of the best seasons for how much it did and tried to do at the time. And there are still just a ton of episodes that deserve to be talked about for their quality, even if they didn't make the list respectively. So let's get into that. Honestly, this episode might have made the list if I had any interest in rewatching, getting images from, or talking about it. I will say, ignoring the legacy of the man involved and all the controversy around this episode, it is still a great episode with a very fun plot and many great jokes. But I really don't want to go any further with my opinions on the episode, so I don't have to talk about some really touchy subjects or make anyone mad. As you know, Lisa is my favorite character in classic Simpsons, and I love most of her episodes. So it's sad to say, this is the first time no Lisa-centric episode will be making the list, after one topped my last 2. This episode was pretty close though, because I love this story and conflict Lisa has to go through, along with the episode getting a lot out of its setting. As someone who's been to DC, I can relate to a lot of these experiences. I just think the episode is a bit weirdly paced, which leads to the message and Lisa's whole arc being a bit underdeveloped. But I do think the message itself, along with Lisa's conflict, is so interesting, especially in a modern day perspective, which still makes this one of my favorites of the season. Honestly, I kind of wish this one would have made the list, because I have a lot more to say on it, but as it stands, it's still a great episode that deserves an honorable mention. This episode has a very fun plot, which leads to some really cool scenarios and a great mystery. I will admit it's not one of the most interesting episodes ever, and the ending is kind of underwhelming, but the episode just does such a good job setting up its story, so you really care about what's going on, and it makes the episode a lot more engaging because of it. So it's still a really fun ride either way. This is a great Treehouse of Horror episode that has a lot of fun with its concept of the stories being dreams, so we get a good variety of creative stories. The stories themselves, though, just aren't anything absolutely spectacular, similar to the last Treehouse of Horror, but they're still great nonetheless because of how they play around with the dream aspect. But they're still not good enough to warrant the episode being on the list proper. I Married Marge is a great flashback episode that does a really good job showing off more about Homer and Marge's relationship as they were getting married. With that said though, a lot of the other flashback episodes blow this one out of the water because the story is just kinda generic and they don't do a lot to really elevate it, but the episode does do enough interesting things with it to make the episode still a great one and worth an honorable mention at least. This was the other great Lisa episode I was surprised didn't make it on the list somewhere, because it expands upon what Lisa Substitute started by looking at one of the best relationships of the show. Out of the two Homer and Lisa episodes this season, this is definitely the better one. For its interesting plot and how far it goes, showing off this relationship. It's not on the list because I think the ending is a bit too melodramatic for my liking. I think it's kind of ridiculous that Lisa's entire love for Homer comes down to one game of football, but it does thematically fit, and the episode is still super interesting and well done despite that. This is a very good Homer version of Life on the Fast Lane that tells the story really well with great characters and a lot of good jokes. But it's still just a weaker version of Life on the Fast Lane, which is why it didn't make the list. This is a really good Sideshow Bob episode that is completely elevated by its art direction and atmosphere, which is the absolute best of the season. It's still a really funny episode without that has a good mystery, but the spectacle of it all is the main reason why it's here. This episode has some of the best jokes of the series and is easily one of the funniest episodes of the season. But the reason it's not on the list is because I've never found the main plot that interesting, but the episode is just so funny thanks to all its classic scenes and a great subplot for that matter that it doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the episode overall, that I don't really care about the main plot that much. But with that said, let's finish this list and finally get into my number 1. Homer at the Bat. I know this is a predictable choice, and all I have to say, once again, is I was really close to picking Radio Bart, and was honestly really hoping I would, because that would have made for a much more of a surprise of a number 1 entry. But once again, the general consensus is the right one, because this is one of, if not the funniest episode of the entire show, and I don't say that lightly. Obviously, once again, I know that statement is extremely predictable, but in all honesty, for classic Simpsons, a lot of the episodes people consider the best are usually the best, which I'm gonna prove in my season 4 and 5 lists. You want me to subvert the narrative a little bit? Then just wait for my season 6 and 7 list, where I put some pretty oddball choices at the top. But for right now, I want to talk about why Homer at the Bat is one of the absolute best. Simply put, it's perfect from beginning to end. Every joke works completely. There are 0 misses, and the episode gets so much out of its concept, where there are so many twists and turns to add to everything. But like I said, this episode just goes so much further with its concept than Radio Bart to make it absolutely perfect. There's nothing I think they could have done better. Every joke is top tier and plays off of the weird story well, but the pacing is so weird and subversive, but in the best possible ways, that it makes the jokes more witty and unpredictable while playing off the plot even more. This episode has so much to account for, including all its weird parodies it does of many different kinds of plots and stories, the softball stuff in general, and managing so many characters, including a huge lineup of guest stars. And it handles all of these things so well to get the most out of all of them, so no aspect feels underdeveloped. Unless it does, which is also used perfectly as a joke. It's meant to be underdeveloped to add more comedy. Also, once again, all this stuff leads into the best set of jokes of the series. While I love absolutely every joke in the episode and the role the guest stars play, with them all being weird and quirky, but amazing players that really make the plot more interesting, just to have them all get picked off one by one due to that's what the plot wants to happen in a bunch of weird and random ways. And even though that is one of my favorite jokes here, along with everything Homer does in the role he plays in the episode, the best character by far who has the best jokes is Mr. Burns. Everything this man says and does in this episode is genius comedy, and is timed perfectly. While he adds such a force of personality, comedy, and story-wise to the episode, and affects it overall in nothing but a positive way, I can't think of a single moment of Mr. Burns here that doesn't work. But I could say that about every single joke in this episode. This episode is just fantastic because of how funny it is. But with all that said, I think the really big reason this episode is so great and why all these elements do work and play off of each other is because the plot affects these characters so much. It just feels like the characters are bending to the plot's will. Like if the plot wants something to happen, it's gonna happen. And that makes how weird this episode is work so well, along with making the jokes a whole lot funnier. And how every aspect elevates the comedy and a plot in weird, wacky ways, which makes for an experience where I was laughing super hard the entire way through while being so interested to see how this wacky story played out. And this is coming from a guy who likes stories, even in comedy shows, that tackle interesting themes or subject matters. That the comedy plays off something really deep or complex, like a really interesting story, or one that just develops its characters more. And this is why, as I've said, my favorite episodes of Simpsons usually are the more story or character-driven ones, like Bart Gets an F, or Lisa's Substitute. And this is also coming from a guy who knows nothing about baseball or these players. And yet, with both of those things, I still loved every part of this episode and got so much out of everything because it all just works when it really shouldn't. That's why this is my favorite of the season, because it really took the time and talent to make all these aspects work together at their best, and it really shows in this episode. I honestly get even more out of this episode than an episode that does jokes around subject matters I'm much more familiar with, like Radio Bart. And that's what I think truly cemented this episode as number one. Well, I debated for a while because I found the subject matter of Radio Bart much more interesting and complex in a way, and it's the episode I thought I enjoyed more because of that for the longest time. In the end, after all the reasons I just pointed out, it wasn't even close. Homer at the Bat really pushed the comedy in this series to its absolute fullest potential around this point, even taking into consideration that season 3 as a whole was a much funnier season. And while there definitely are many other funny episodes in the next few seasons, and many other episodes that do similar things, that have weird and wacky plots, which play around with its characters a lot more, Homer at the Bat is still one of the best, one of the funniest, and really did start something amazing by just showing off how funny the show can really be. I really have nothing else to say that hasn't been said by countless other people, so I'll end it here. Homer at the Bat is the funniest episode of season 3. One of the funniest episodes of The Simpsons as a whole, and one of the funniest episodes of any TV show ever. In a season that was more comedy focused than ever and tried to get the most jokes out of every concept, it was only right to put the funniest episode by far at number 1. And no interesting character study or amazing social commentary was going to get in this episode's way of taking the number 1 spot on this list. And with that, the list is done. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like and subscribe for more content similar to this in the future, along with checking out the other videos on this channel. By the time my next video comes out, I would like to hit 10 subscribers. So if you could help me reach that goal, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, leave a comment telling me what you thought of the video or what your own list would have been. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Lastly, I said I'd announce the other show I would be looking at on this channel for the time being at the end of this video, so here it is. My next video will be about the top 5 best Hey Arnold Season 1 episodes. So until then, this is Chocolate Guy, signing off.